Welcome to News Inside. I'm An Jang-hyun. Let's meet our panelists. Professor Shin Sang-hyuk from Kyung University Graduate School of International Studies is with us. And Dr. Bong Young-sik from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies is back as well. Seoul and Washington have agreed to deploy an advanced U.S. missile defense system THAAD on the Korean peninsula by the end of next year. We'll look at what led to this decision and what significance it holds.
Seoul and Washington announced plans to deploy one U.S. missile defense THAAD battery to South Korea. The site will be Seongju City in Gyeongsang-buk-do Province.
사드 체계의 군사적 효용성을 극대화하고 지역 주민의 안전을 보장하면서 건강과 환경에 영향이 없는 최적의 배치 부지로서 경상북도 성주 지역을 건의하였고 이에 대해 양국 국방장관이 승인하였습니다.
This comes after the two countries started negotiations on the matter 5 months ago in February. Seoul notified neighboring countries of the decision ahead of the announcement, emphasizing the deployment will only be for operations against the threat of North Korea's nuclear and missile development.
사드는 북한 이외의 어떤 제3국을 겨냥하거나 제3국의 안보 이익을 침해하지 않고 또 할 이유도 없습니다. 우리는 우리나라와 국민을 지키기 위한 순수한 방어 목적의 조치를 취하는 것일 뿐입니다.
One THAAD battery consists of 6 launcher vehicles which are positioned roughly 400 to 500 meters away from the radar. After deployment, it will be under the control of the commander of U.S. Forces Korea and operated in South Korea-U.S. joint military operations.
Seoul had been mulling this over for quite some time. What do you think finally led Seoul to make its move?
Well, I think it must not be an easy question for the U.S. and Korean government. But I think one of the most important factors which made the Korean U.S. government make a final decision is the recent missile test conducted by the North Korean government. As we know very well, last June, the North Korean government launched 2 Musudan missiles. And then one thing which is very important is this Musudan missile has a 3,000 kilometer range. And within 3,000 kilometer range, the Guam is located. That means that we know the strategic significance of the Guam. Guam has many USA military bases, and then there are many strategic weaponries over there, which has been big threats against North Korean regime. So by launching the Musudan missile very successfully, it can be a direct threat to the USA and Korean government. So I think this is certainly one of the main reasons why Korean and USA government finally make a decision to deploy the THAAD system in the Korean peninsula.
Now, THAAD is seen as one of the strongest countermeasures to date against North Korea's nuclear and missile threat. But in addition to adding another layer of defense, could there have been some political and diplomatic calculations behind Seoul's decision as well?
As Professor Shin correctly pointed out, the successful launch of the Musudan missile by North Korea last month, June, was the trigger of this sweeping decision by both sides, Washington and Seoul. But as you pointed out, that there is a political consideration as well. That is very deep disappointment felt by the Park Geun-hye administration for China having not done enough to curb and stop North Korea's pursuit of nuclear and missile developmental programs, despite the fact that during the tenure, the Park Geun-hye administration has been making a lot of foreign policy effort to gain China's understanding and support to collectively deal with the growing threat of North Korea's missile and nuclear weapons. For instance, when North Korea conducted its 4th nuclear test, the Xi Jinping government did not really return the emergency hotline call from the Korean government for immediate response and reactions to deal with the game changer situation taking place on the Korean Peninsula, while just maintaining the tried and true neutral diplomatic position by the Xi Jinping government. I think that really etched a very negative image of the Xi Jinping government's inaction in the Park Geun-hye administration of South Korea. We all remember that Park Geun-hye administration has been trying very hard to acknowledge and invite China's influence on the Korean affairs. For instance, Park Geun-hye administration went to participate in the, at that time, very controversial military victory parade taking place in Beijing in commemoration of the 70th anniversary of China's victory over Japan's imperialism. But Chinese government has not really appropriately and sufficiently responded to the good gesture rendered by the Park Geun-hye administration.
Well, Korea's neighboring countries were quick to respond to the announcement of THAAD deployment. Here's what some of them had to say.
Following Seoul's announcement on THAAD deployment, Beijing's foreign ministry expressed its strong opposition to the move.
有意在韩国部署萨德导弹系统的问题，中国政府已经阐述了我们的严正的立场。我们认为美国部署萨德导弹系统。
Russia's first deputy ministry for the Federation Council's Defense Committee said that Moscow could deploy missile bases to the Far East, hinting it could take military action. North Korea also slammed the decision, issuing a statement from the Korean People's Army with a grave warning for South Korea and the U.S. In light of this strong opposition, the U.S. State Department emphasized THAAD is strictly for defense purposes.
It will add to and improve our abilities to better defend our South Korean allies and the South Korean people. It is a purely defensive system.
Japan welcomed the THAAD deployment in a statement from the Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary, who called it a contribution to peace and stability in the region.
China and Russia are clearly opposed to the deployment, while Japan is welcoming the move. What is at stake here for each of these countries?
Those attitudes are a clear reflection of their own respective strategic positions. China and Russia are afraid that the upcoming deployment of missile defense system on the Korean Peninsula would undermine the strategic nuclear balance between China and Russia, two nuclear powers on one hand, and the United States on the other hand. The maintenance of the second strike capability is the essential component of the reliable, mutually assured destruction situation. So Chinese and Russian concern is that by deploying the THAAD on the Korean Peninsula, then the power of U.S. shield will prevail over the power of the weapon, the sword, the nuclear weapons of Russia and China. Then in the long run, although for a foreseeable future, the deployment of the THAAD on the Korean Peninsula will only dealing with the missile and nuclear threat from North Korea. You never know in the future that THAAD on the Korean Peninsula will be targeting China and Russia. Then China and Russia will be vulnerable to the pressure on the U.S. defense system.
Well, North Korea, of course, is not happy. It has threatened a physical counteraction once the site of deployment is set. For now, Pyongyang seems to be aligning itself with Beijing and Moscow. But what kind of action do you think Pyongyang will take?
Well, some experts are explain about the possibility of the direct attack of North Koreans against the deployment site of the THAAD on the Korean Peninsula, but I don't think it's possible. Well, I think the North Koreans try to empathize that they have the capacity to destroy the THAAD missile system by themselves. So I think they will conduct the missile tests continuously, to build the image that they have enough capacity to destroy the THAAD system. By doing so, they just try to empathize that their policy to be one of the nuclear power states in the world, and they want to have a negotiation, direct contact with the United States. I think those kind of scenarios, the strategies the North Koreans will take.
So more
Yes.
missile tests are likely.
And
Well-
it is very interesting that the North Korean government just announced that it's going to just close the so-called New York channel of communication with the
Right.
United States, which has been the very important, probably the only reliable channel of communication between Pyongyang and Washington, D.C. I think this is by and large a short-term response to the announcement of the deployment of the THAAD in the South Korea. But as you pointed out, then with more time, then after a number of provocations to test the resolve of Seoul and Washington, then North Korea may come back with a very bold proposal, including potential discussion of the signing of a peace treaty in exchange for some improvement on the front of the North Korea's missile and nuclear programs by reactivating the so-called New York channel.
So the Seoul government was clearly aware of the sticky situation that this would create. Nevertheless, it decided to go ahead with the THAAD deployment. In the end, though, is it going to be worth the ire that it is causing in the diplomatic circles?
Well, only time will tell whether this has been the right decision. Very difficult, but absolutely necessary decision by the South Korean government in the name of national interest and the protection of its citizens from harm's way. But for now, we can say that we can ask us this serious question: without the decision to deploy THAAD, are we really reliably safe from the growing threat of North Korea with its missile and nuclear weapons? I mean, there is a lot of controversial aspects of the deployment of THAAD, alienating Russia and China, and abandoning the potential influence of China on North Korea. That might have been very beneficial to North Korea to have a second thought about its Byungjin policy, the simultaneous pursuit of economic development and nuclear weapons. You can go on and complaining and criticizing a decision, but at the end of the day, you have to also pressure yourself to, with this serious question, whether time is on South Korea's side. And without deployment of THAAD, are we really safe? Are we really capable of dealing with the new kinds of missile threat potentially deployed by North Korea? So it's a matter of taking an insurance. The premium of insurance is always expensive, and the benefit of insurance cannot be assessed prior to you getting into the actual situation that would need the insurance.
One thing which I want to add up is, basic responsibility of the government is to protect the people and the nation. And then, as Dr. Wong well explained, if the government does not take any countermeasures against the North Korean missile tests or threats by the North Koreans, then the government could not avoid the criticism because they do not properly take measures, they do not take the proper actions to protect the people and the nation. So that is very, symbolically is very, very meaningful and very important for the government. So I think the decision made by the government cannot be delayed anymore.
Right. There is a gap between the current situation when North Korea is speeding up its missile and nuclear developments and the target date of South Korea having its own missile defense system called KAMD, scheduled to be completed in 2020. So in the gap of 5 years, we have to ask whether we can protect ourselves from
Even
North
with the
Korea's missile.
KAMD, apparently it's difficult to
Definitely, there is
protect
no
us from
guarantee that the
long-range
KMD
missiles.
will be sufficient to deal with North Korea's missile capability because the speed of the missile development by North Korea has been far surpassing the expectation by outside world. So you never know.
Well, we've seen mixed reactions from political parties as well as the public on this THAAD decision. Tell us what sort of procedures are left until the actual deployment and what are some issues that need to be resolved?
Well, the Ministry of National Defense made it clear that this agenda did not require the ratification at the National Assembly. One of the key issues lying ahead is to work together with the United States forces in South Korea about the command and control system. Because during the peacetime, their command and control system covering the THAAD system, if it's going to deploy it, will be by the head of the Korean military. But the wartime operational control belongs to the commander of the United States force in South Korea and the 7th Command of the U.S. Air Forces. So if there's a, God forbid, North Korea will launch a missile attack to South Korea, then there will not be enough time to both sides, both commands to seamlessly transfer control and command to deal with such an urgent situation. So both sides needs to start the exercises and developing the the actual manual to iron out these problems of the command and control system.
Well, while this was going on in Korea, over in Japan, upper house elections took place this past weekend, ending in a landslide victory for the ruling coalition. But the outcome has sparked some concern among neighboring countries.
The ruling coalition walked away with a landslide victory in Japan's recent upper house election. What's drawing attention from other countries is the strong number of supporters for constitutional amendment rallying around Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has continually pushed to amend the country's pacifist constitution that renounces war, the use of force, and militarization as a sovereign right. The push has neighboring countries that still remember Japan's imperial past on their toes. But within the public, more people are opposed to a revision. A survey from the country's Asahi Shimbun indicates 55% believe there is no need to amend the current constitution. Despite this, the question is, will Japan transition to a normal state once again? Tension surrounding the issue will likely linger for some time.
So the concern is that the Abe administration could move to revise the pacifist clause of Japan's constitution, turning its defensive army into a fully functioning military for the first time since World War II. Is this a valid concern?
I would say that it is not. I'd like to be on the positive side. Because in reality, although the peace constitution is restrained for any Japanese government to move in a wrong direction with its military power, but constitution itself is not sufficient to curb the nation to exercise its right to wage a war. A right to wage a war is a sovereign right of any country. Japan is a special case with its so-called peace constitution. The Article 9 of the constitution denies Japan's right to wage a war, but with some creative interpretation of the constitutional clauses, then Japan, if it ever determined to wage a war, will wage a war. So it's only partial restraint for Japanese government to go in that direction.
They will not go to war as a means of settling international disputes.
Right,
That's what the
but
Constitution
it depends
says.
on how you interpret international dispute, and it depends on how you define settlement of the dispute, right?
Well, yeah, whatever happened to forever in that clause?
Right.
Because it does say the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right. Now, this article is what the whole issue hinges upon. How possible do you think a revision is?
It is very possible, but if I tell you the Japanese government measures which they have made, to make the amendment of the constitution. Well, according to the report released by Asahi newspaper, which is one of the major daily newspaper in Japan, the Japanese government tried to get more, as a first action, they want to make the amendment of the so-called emergency clause. The Prime Minister will get the so-called emergency power in times of crisis, such as natural disasters or enemies attack on Japan. The Prime Minister could have a chance to take some measures by himself. And then actually this amendment seems to be easy to get the support from the people. And so the basic strategies taken by the Japanese government to make the amendment of the Article 9 of the Constitution was they just tried to make amendment of this clause. They want to put the emergency clause in the Constitution. And after that, they want to make the amendment of the Article 9, which is more divisive, the issues in Japan. But after the outcome of the upper house, the election, there must be some changes in the stance of the Japanese government in an effort to make the amendment of the Article 9.
They still need a majority vote in a referendum, though.
Definitely. But according to outcomes of the upper house election, even youngsters, they must be, I think, against this constitution, but they cast the vote to the Liberal Democratic Party, and then they got about 40% from the young generation people. Of course, they took just only 2% of the total number of the voters, but symbolically, we can see the changes of the Japanese society towards the amendment of constitution. So I think it's a matter of time, and then Abe himself, Prime Minister Abe himself, gained huge confidence in his efforts to change the amendment of the Article 9 of the Constitution.
I like to express a different opinion from the fact that I'm kind of in a self-denial. I like to see different development taking place after this election in Japan by Abe administration. We can consider 4 points that may work against the Prime Minister Abe's potential attempts to push the agenda of constitutional revision. One is that the Japanese constituents spoke that they are not really interested in constitutional revision, although they render the Liberal Democratic Party led by Prime Minister Abe a landslide victory. But the main reason for them to cast their ballot in favor of the Liberal Democratic Party is not for their agreement with Prime Minister Abe's political agendas, or even Abenomics, but simply there is no better alternative. The opponents are not reliable. So once the Prime Minister Abe tried to make its own interpretation that, Japanese people have spoken, that this is a mandate spoken by the Japanese constituents that we have to revise the constitution, then the Japanese constituents who supported the Liberal Democratic Party in this election may start turning their backs against the Abe administration. And second point is although with this election victory, the LDP-led coalition has secured 2/3 majority seats at the upper house, 162 seats. But the Komeito party, very important party in the coalition, opposes the constitutional revision or any expansion of self-defense forces of Japan. So if Prime Minister Abe pushes the agenda of constitutional revision too hard, then he may fail to secure the Komeito party's support. Then
he loses the coalition.
He loses the coalition and fail to secure the 2/3 line necessary for constitutional revision bill. And third, the Abe administration has already achieved basically the alternative ways to allow the Japan self-defense forces to expand the scope and mission of its activities by passing 11 legislations last year. Then public will not understand or accept the argument. We already supported your previous legislations, and what more do you need? And the fourth point is that procedure of the constitutional revision itself is extremely difficult. You have to have 2/3 majority votes in both chambers of the THAAD.
Right.
Then you have to put the bill on a national referendum, like the Brexit, and you have to secure the absolute majority vote.
Well, after the election victory, Abe himself did say that it's not going to be easy to change the constitution.
But he didn't say that it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to do it anyway.
He did say it's not his immediate goal for now.
I want to talk about 2 things. One of the most important factors affecting his efforts, outcome of his efforts, is the economy. Why the Prime Minister Abe has taken, so-called Abenomics? Well, I think to revitalize the depressed economy, he wanted to get the momentum, in his policies, including the amendment of the Constitution. So I think the economic situation will be one of the most important factors affecting the changes of the revisions of the Japanese constitution. And the second one is actually the relationship with the USA. I mean, the peace constitution was actually made when the Japan was lost at the Pacific War, World War II. So I think on the part of the Abe government, definitely they get rid of one of the very difficult obstacles, which is the objections of the USA government about the amendment of the Constitution. But I think at the moment it's gone. I think when the Japanese government announced so-called collective self-defense strategies, the USA government did not say any comments. So they accepted the changes of the Constitution in some sense. So I think in this context, external factor, obstacles has gone. So I think the economic situation will be one of the most important factors. Of course, because of Brexit, right. Japanese economy seems to be to face more difficulties than before, but I think there must be some possibility.
So are you saying that if Abenomics works and the economy recovers, then he will gain the support of the people?
I think so. Practically speaking, it is not easy, but there must be some more positive effects on the Abe's administration in an effort to revise their constitution.
The United States would welcome the expansion of the role of the Japan self-defense forces, either under the doctrine of the collective self-defense or within the framework of a US-Japan security alliance. But at the same time, in order for the United States pivot to Asia policy to become a more complete success, United States policy should also embrace cooperation with South Korea as an important leg of trilateral security cooperation.
Yes.
But if Japan pushes the agenda of becoming so-called a normal country with a constitutional revision, then it will concern the United States that Japan may ruin the very foundation of the increased trilateral security cooperation among United States, South Korea, and Japan. So United States may not be so enthusiastic about Abe administration to contemplating on the Japan's constitutional revision.
And it's going to irk China as well.
Definitely,
given the history that we
right.
have, we can't blame Korea and China for being nervous.
Yeah, related to our previous discussion of the deployment of THAAD, then the Chinese reaction has been as harsh as they could be. One government announcement quoting the old saying in China that when friend visits us, we treat the friend with wine and food, but when the leopard and wolves come, we punish them. That's a very direct threat to South Korea and the United States. So in addition to the THAAD deployment, then if China also receive another quote-unquote bad news about Japan trying to revise its peace constitution, then we can expect what kind of reaction China will make in response.
So with Korea's THAAD deployment and Japan's potential transition to a quote-unquote normal state, we can definitely see that some people are concerned a new Cold War is brewing in Northeast Asia. In a time like this, what can Seoul do?
Well, you have to be really practical. You have to prioritize what you can control for your own defense without too much worrying about speculative future. Because Japan's self-defense forces expanding its role is not entirely bad news, negative news for South Korea's national defense. Because if there be another war breaking out on the Korean Peninsula under the security alliance systems between South Korea and United States and US and Japan, at least 7 US bases located in Japan will be integrated with the United States forces in South Korea to deter and defend South Korea from the threat from North Korea. So you have to see the whole picture and assess your own decisions.
I have a feeling that we will be talking more about Japan's possible constitutional revision in the months to come. Moving on, though, President Park Geun-hye is visiting Mongolia to attend the Asia-Europe meeting, or ASEM summit. We'll take a closer look at what issues are on the agenda and where Korea's relations stand with Mongolia.
This year marks the 20th anniversary since the Asia-Europe meeting, or the ASEM summit, first kicked off. With 51 member countries, the gathering is an informal intergovernmental forum for dialogue on everything from politics to economic cooperation and cultural exchange. President Park Geun-hye is visiting Mongolia to attend the 11th ASEM Summit and use the opportunity to further her agenda for more open diplomatic policies.
우리는 보호무역주의와 신고립주의 극복을 이끌어가는 선도 국가가 되어야 합니다.
President Park's summit with Mongolian President Chakya Elberg-Dorj is another event at the center of attention. This is the second meeting since the two heads of state met in Seoul back in May. During the summit, the leaders are expected to discuss issues across a wide spectrum, including economic cooperation and North Korea's nuclear program, which will help further solidify ties between the two nations.
The ASEM Summit is held every other year, but I'm sure this year there are some big issues weighing on people's minds.
Right, because it will be the first leaders summit after the Brexit.
Right.
So it is a very good opportunity for President Park representing South Korea. She listed a few main points that she hopes to achieve during her visit to ASEM and the upcoming bilateral summit with the Mongolian president. One is to consolidate South Korea's commitment to free trade and open door policy, and to increase South Korea's cooperation with other countries to discuss the security conditions on the Korean Peninsula, especially in the backdrop of the U.S. government's decisions to list Kim Jong-un, one of the main subjects of the economic sanctions, for his responsibility for systematic and prolonged human rights violations. So the pressure diplomacy toward nuclear North Korea continues by President Park, and promote the bilateral trade and the cooperation with Mongolia as the comprehensive partner during her visit.
So those were some of the main topics that are up for discussion. What kind of results do you think we can expect?
I think the Park Geun-hye government could achieve make some achievement from this the summit. The Mongolian economy is right now standing on the edge, selecting the prosperity or difficult path. Definitely, the Mongolian government seems to take the way to achieve economic growth, practical benefits. So certainly Mongolian government tried to put more priorities on the relationship with South Korean government. And the one thing which I want to emphasize more is that the Korean government has the very well planned strategies to develop or strengthen the economic ties with the Mongolian government. During the state visit, definitely Korean government tried to introduce the first step, the measures to strengthen the economic cooperation with the Mongolian government. For example, they do not have any the basic data or basic researches about their economic structure, or they don't have any capacity to make the mid or long-term economic development plan. So at the initial stage, Korean government tried to help them to prepare those kind of basic foundations for the continuous economic development. And then second stage is that how we're going to work together. Particularly in three sectors: energy sector, and then the transportation and infrastructure development, this sector, and then the diversification of the trade structure of the Mongolian government. These three things seems to be the three basic sector adopted by the Mongolian government. So based on their plan, the Korean government tried to decide how to help them first and how to cooperate with them at the second stage.
Well, Mongolia has long maintained close ties with North Korea, and I'm sure that was on the president's mind when she decided to make her first official visit to the country.
Yeah, definitely. The diplomatic tie between Mongolia and North Korea has a long history since 1948, but the relationship has not always been peaches and cream. There is a tense period, especially when Mongolia normalized its diplomatic tie with South Korea in 1990 and expressed its support for the Sunshine Policy. So North Korea protested to Mongolia for these changes. Although there's a closer economic tie between the countries, Mongolia receives about 1,600 overseas workers from North Korea every year. But at the same time, for long-term economic development of Mongolia, enhanced cooperation with South Korea as a major economic partnership is so essential. So there will be a balancing act by the Mongolian government. And Mongolia has not been always supportive for North Korea unconditionally. We all remember the controversial speech made by Mongolian President Ep.35 when he was visiting North Korea in 2013. Part of his speech at the Kim Il-sung University was that Mongolia respects human rights and freedom, supports the rule of the law, and interestingly, he also declared, no tyranny can last long.
Өөрийн эрхээр зов гэж ярилцдаг ийм ардтам. Аливаа дарангуйлал бол мөнх биш юм. Харин хүний эрх чөлөөтэй амьдрах хүсэл эрмэлзэл бол байнгын хүч юм аа.
A subtle criticism.
Not so subtle
Not so
criticism
subtle
of North Korean
criticism.
leadership. No other place but Kim Il-sung University in 2013. And the previous president, Ochil Bat, also made interesting point in the recent newspaper interview that he opposes the development of nuclear weapons by North Korea because he believes that national security cannot be guaranteed by nuclear weapons, but national security comes from thick walnut. Economic prosperity has to be considered as the best option for North Korea to secure its national security. So Mongolian leaderships are not always or unconditionally siding with North Korea.
They have more incentive to side with us now if there are economic
That will be
benefits involved.
that will be the point that President Park's diplomacy has to focus on.
So it's been 26 years since Korea and Mongolia established diplomatic relations. You mentioned some areas that we could work together on, but is there room for improvement in other areas as well? For example, I understand that the portion of our ODA or direct investment in Mongolia is quite low.
Well, yes, it is. The Mongolia has the huge potentiality as one of the most important trading partners, economic partners for Korea, because they have abundant natural resources, untouched yet, undeveloped yet. So I think there must be many rooms to be cooperate between each other. So as I said before, the Mongolian government has put the first priorities on 3 sectors. Develop the transportation and the infrastructure sector. This sector must be one of the very attractive sector or very important sector which we are very good at. So it can be one of the very important industrial sector for us to cooperate each other. So for this one, as a first strategic plan for Korea, the Korean government has a detailed plan to participate in the build the electricity system in Mongolia, because Mongolia has a vast territory. Then to provide the electricity, they should have to build the electric system over there. Korea has good experiences in developing this system, and we have certainly a competitive advantage in this sector. How about energy sector? As I said before, Mongolia has huge territory, which means they have huge natural resources, and including new energy sources. So Korea has, from the previous government, we have put the first priorities on developing so-called new energies. The blue energies, green energies, So we have competitive advantages in this sector. So we can have the so-called cooperative relations with the Mongolian government in this sector.
We'll see what the president comes back home with. It's time for us to wrap up our discussion. Your final thoughts of the week?
Well, I think, Japan should be changed. I think Japan is certainly one of the very important countries in the world. So they should not just put only on the amendment of the Constitution. It can be very important for them, but they should have more broader perspectives as one of the leading countries in the world.
You think they should change their mind about constitutional revision?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Dr. Fong?
I think this is very interesting that not only Japan starting talking about constitutional revision, but also South Korea has been talking about constitutional revision. So it'll be a very interesting case to watch in the future. Is it going to be a
race to the end?
A race to the end.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you.
That is all for this edition of News Inside. Thanks for watching. We'll be back with more next week.